Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Get in the Herd After Hours. I'm your host, Alex Bond. Get in the Herd is a recovery podcast brought to you by the McCarthy Foundation. I myself work for the McCarthy Foundation as a recovery coach, trainer, podcast host, and a house leader. Even more importantly, I am a person in recovery from substance use disorder, which means that for the last 11 months, I've not found the desire to put any mood or mind altering substances in my body and have found a new sense of purpose for life. I'm here with Tom, Michael, and Melissa. How are you guys doing?
Doing great.
Good.
Awesome. Happy to have you on. Tom, why don't you introduce yourself?
Certainly. Tom Herb here, live in Maryland, and very grateful for being on this episode this evening with you all. Thank you all very much. Melissa, certainly last night had a great conversation, and of course, meeting Alex and Michael for the first time. I'm here this evening just to share some insight onto an organization we started in Maryland in memory of my younger brother, Jimmy, that happened to pass away almost 1 year ago to the day. 2 weeks ago was his angel day when he passed away from an opioid addiction overdose. So later in the episode, I'm sure I'll share some more about the Hoffa Foundation and the impact we're making in our local communities. Thank you, Alex.
Absolutely. Very happy to have you on, my friend. Michael, friend of the pod. How are you doing, dude?
Good, man. Good to see everybody here. It's good to be back. I've been dying. I wanted to know what really happens after hours, because I haven't been on after hours before. So this is a real privilege to get to join everybody here.
Yeah, it's a little spicier. Why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure. I'm Michael King, and I am the director and creator of the Communities Project. We are a national initiative with the mission of saving 1 million lives from substance use-related deaths over the next 2 decades, and to do that by investing in the leadership and community organizing of the folks who stand on the front lines of the issue. I'm also a person in long-term recovery, which for me means I haven't had a drink, a drug, or placed a bet since February 16th of 2013.
Awesome. Congratulations. Happy to have you on, buddy. And
Thanks,
Melissa,
man.
how are you doing? Why don't you introduce yourself?
I'll say this. What happens after hours? My dad used to tell me nothing good happens anytime after midnight, and I proved his theory true on many occasions. So I recommend that we stick after hours here. But my name is Melissa McCarthy. I too am from Maryland, and I'm a person in long-term recovery, which for me means I have not had a drink or a drug, mind or mood-altering substance in the 11 years this coming December the 10th.
Awesome.
So I've worked in the substance use arena for the better part of the last decade. And, I'm just always, excited to participate in anything that McShin does. That's for sure.
Awesome. We're very, very glad to have you all on. I'll jump right in. What we were talking about before the show is, so there are a lot of socio-political conversations going on right now. Some of them prior to the pandemic, some of them have just been exacerbated due to the pandemic or heightened. My main question, I guess I'll start with you, Michael, is how do we cut through the fray? How do we make sure that we are still a part of the conversation in the recovery movement?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is to always make sure that we're telling effective stories, right? And this is something that we talk about a lot in the leadership training that we do. The number one thing that's going to resonate with anybody we're out there talking to in the community, that's going to resonate with legislators, if we're advocating, it's going to be compelling stories. We sometimes, I think, like to fall into the trap of knowing all the facts and the data about this issue. And that's really important. We need to know that stuff too. But people actually forget like half of what they learn within 20 minutes of learning it. And what they remember is stories. And I think our friends at Mobilize Recovery did a great job with this at the big event they had a couple weeks ago now. We talk about it in all our trainings, but really continuing to use our voices out there, but not just to shout our stories and our experiences from the rooftop, but to do so in effective and compelling ways, and in ways that are kind of geared more towards our audiences than to ourselves, right? Because when we just say, when we're telling a story of self and it's just a story about something that happened to us, but it's not really focused on what our audiences are looking to hear, nobody's going to connect with it. So we have to be super present with our audience, and we can't tell stories, I think, and I'll stand on my soapbox and editorialize here. We can't tell our stories right now without the context of this moment we're in. So we have to actually honor the moment that we're in if we're going to cut through. Otherwise, we kind of look like fools, actually. So I think telling our stories effectively, but doing so in a way that honors this crazy moment, whether it's because of global pandemics or politics or race relations or whatever else is going on, like we can't tell our stories outside of that context. So doing those two things, I think, is the most important thing that we have to remember right now.
No, absolutely. So Tom, you are in a situation where you are not only telling your story, but your friend's story at the same time. How do you effectively do that?
Yeah, Alex, it was interesting. When my brother had passed away last year, the first thing that came to mind for me was I wanted to do something to keep his spirit alive. Never did I think it would transform into a nonprofit that's out there on a mission to make an impact. And so when everything hit, back at the beginning of March with the pandemic, we were trying to figure out what do we do at that point in time. We were pivoting and adjusting while we had the sale of our coffee beans. All the proceeds go towards fighting addiction to the foundation, to the mission we'll talk more about later on in the episode. We started pivoting and started helping out local hospitals with PPE. We started helping out other organizations rising above addiction. They have 2 sober living facilities in Carroll County, Maryland, giving them a donation, Meals on Wheels for the elderly. So it's almost one of those things where we have our mission through all this. We're trying to help other people out as well. So we've been in a interesting journey the last 4 or 5 months. And, but certainly keeping our message at the forefront every single day.
Yeah, that finding and articulating that message is kind of hard, not hard to do, but it can be very complicated to do, especially when we're in a movement that is asking a lot, I think, at times. In my opinion, Melissa, do you agree with that? Do you think that we kind of need to hone in on what the message is, or do you think we're overcomplicating it, or what are your thoughts on I guess the message as a whole?
Well, I think the message is save as many lives as possible by any means necessary, right? And I think it's difficult to mobilize and actually make strides in any singular direction when we have a whole bunch of different organizations that might have their own unique niche. But the reality is, anytime you bring groups together and really like tackle one single issue at a time, right? Whether it's a certain piece of legislature, whether it's insurance coverage for certain things, which is a whole nother battle. Whatever the singular issue is, we tackle that, right? Where we go one, we go all, we get after it, we get it done, and then we move on to the next. And slowly but surely, we see we make strides.
No, absolutely. That's well said. Michael, Joanna had a good question about how she could get more involved in those sorts of leadership trainings. I know personally that the Hoffa Foundation, I do a recovery coach training where the last Thursday and Friday of every month for 16 hours, I'll train people on how to help others and become peer leaders in recovery. How do we get more involved on that, maybe on even a larger scale?
Sure. So I'll say this to Joanne, I saw your comment, but really it's for everybody too. If you go to communitiesproject.org, you'll see we have some free trainings coming up actually at the end of September and one in mid-October. And those are, please, everybody come, because the leadership principles that we focus on in our trainings aren't necessarily specific to addiction, but they're based around the idea that we don't create leaders. That's not what leadership development is. We all have that natural leadership in us already. The question is, what's keeping us caged? What's blocking us from really stepping out onto the world and roaring? Thank you to putting the link up there. And what we offer is a set of principles that when you practice them, they can always get you unstuck, and they can really unleash you upon the world in the way you're meant to be. So go to our website, sign up for one of those free trainings we have coming up, and that's for everybody. We'd love to have everybody there. Everybody has such a really powerful contribution to make to everybody else as well. So I hope folks are able to do that. And that goes for Alex, Tom, and Melissa as well, of course.
I'd be happy to, definitely. I love any sort of training like that. So Tom, you seem to be a leader in putting this entrepreneurial effort together, and no one told you to do that. So what was kind of your motivation for that? Do you see yourself as a leader? Can you kind of speak on I guess your personal experience with leadership, being kind of entrepreneurial and at the forefront of a bit of this conversation?
Absolutely. So what I didn't realize, Alex, was, when my brother had passed away, really the magnitude, and the impact this has on everyone out there. And, right away, not too long after he had passed, I was thinking about what can we do to keep his spirit alive. And I started thinking about the things that Jimmy really liked doing. And certainly he was big into sports. He loved to drink coffee. And you can see on my shirt here, people are probably wondering, what's Hoffa all about? We all had nicknames as kids growing up, right? And so Jimmy, my brother, all of his buddies called him Hoffa. And we're like, we're not going to, do away with his nickname. We're going to keep that going with the Raven there. You can see on it. And so the acronym now stands for Healing Opportunity Free from Addiction. And we thought, let's formulate a nonprofit. Let's have the coffee sales as a vehicle. Started reaching out to coffee suppliers out in Seattle, Washington. Found a great one called Joe's Garage. They put me in contact with a web design company who put me in contact with a packaging company. And as I shared the story of my brother, there was silence on the call, on all of those calls, because it impacted all of them. I'm just like, wow, like all these people. And so we stood this up back in late October, November of last year. And, it's made a significant impact. Our mission is to take all the proceeds from the sale of this amazing coffee. And one day my mother wants to open up a sober living facility in the southern part of Carroll County, Maryland, where they happen to live right now. And that mission we thought would maybe take us a couple of years is going to happen sooner. Over 1,000 bags of coffee have been scattered across the United States. Alaska just ordered some last week. 25 out of the 50 states now have it. We're shipping out to different people through online sales. But at the end of the day, it's all about our mission. And it's all I think about every day waking up is what impact can we make? Who can we make sure or ensure that, no other mother, my mother, has to lose a son or daughter. So just the awareness out there. I mean, I get, phone calls and text messages and private emails or LinkedIn, people just saying, keep doing what you're doing, and they may have nothing to do with the coffee or come to an event, but just the awareness, keeping it front and center, top of mind, making sure that, doesn't matter who you are, what you do, what you look like, it impacts everyone, it feels like. So very passionate about it. And we're only in the beginning stages and already making an impact locally and within the region. So very happy to be here this evening with you all.
No, absolutely. It's great work that you do. And I think it kind of, just to circle back, as Melissa was saying, just like small things a bit at a time are what really affect larger change, especially grassroots projects like that. It's really important. So Melissa, before the program, we were talking about what is referred to as the Millman Report. Can you kind of explain what that is? And then we'll kind of open up a little bit about that.
Whew, that's a loaded explanation. So the Millman Report, Millman is an actuary, right, that digs through all sorts of data and compiles information together in an aggregated format that reveals all sorts of truths. In this particular case, we're talking about, mental health coverage, right? I don't know if Todd can throw up a link to the Millman Report, or if you have the report in front of you to pull up some of the stats. But, as of late, what's very interesting to me is, several months ago, early on in the pandemic, we're talking about, how COVID is crazy and everybody's all scared of COVID, but, the voice of the addict, right, is lost momentum in terms of center stage. And then next thing you know, we've got Black Lives Matter. All of these things are incredibly important, right? But all of a sudden we start to see a spike in overdoses. And there are a couple of things, as far as I can tell, that have changed over that period of time. And the Millman Report really backs that theory, right? That there's still not enough coverage, right? There still is not a quality in coverage. There still is not a quality and ease of access to, there we go. So there's still disparities. And in fact, this editorial, I guess is what we would call it, this report further describes that the disparities are widening despite all of the efforts, over the past decade. And really, if Carol McDade were here, she'd be talking about the past 2 decades that have been devoted to mental health parity, and having equal coverage on the medical surgical side of the fence, as well as the behavioral health care side of the fence. And this can get fairly complicated, but the truth of the matter is, I just find it absolutely astonishing that insurance companies are quick to roll in, hey, we're gonna cut out the cost sharing on behalf of the patient for COVID testing and for primary care visits and for all these other things, right? And yet there still is no easier access. There is still just as much expense associated with going to seek treatment in any setting whatsoever. More recently, I worked with a client of mine in Mississippi, and we uncovered that there was the largest payer, actually, in the state of Mississippi, was treating outpatient mental health visits as a specialty visit. So it's not a copay like a primary care provider. You have to meet your entire deductible before there's a cost share. And even then, it's like an 80-20 split, which means that, the insurance company will pick up 80% of the billed charge for that visit. So the visit's $100, insurance will pay $80, and I'm still left paying $20. But in some cases, I have to meet my entire deductible before the insurance company will actually pick up any of that expense. How is this still happening?
Yeah, because people are going to have to pay, at least my experience was, I pay in installments after I get it done. But if people can't even get their foot in the door, then this, just isn't going to work at the end of the day. So I'm also reading that the out-of-network inpatient use rose from 5.5 to 9.3 times more likely than out-of-network medical surgical inpatient use between 2013 and 2017, which was nearly twice the national average. So the Millman Report, just to make sure I get it correct, was strictly for Maryland. Is that correct?
I believe that I believe the report is for all of commercial insurance providers.
Okay.
I think it does a comparison of all health plans across the U.S., including Medicaid, Medicare. I could be wrong.
Okay. Yeah. I'm getting the breeze on this. I don't want to be ignorant to it because it's very informative and important stuff. So I highly recommend people look it up and get some more information about it. And the whole insurance scheme, I don't really want to go down the rabbit hole on personally, But, someone was telling me about patient brokering the other day, which I had to like look up and learn. Michael, do you have any experience or knowledge about what this is? I mean,
well, I'm glad I don't have any experience with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's bad apples in the world who do bad stuff and really cause a tremendous amount of harm to a lot of people who, like most of us, have been desperately in need of help at some point. So I think that I personally would prefer to not give those awful individuals too much airtime. What I will say is, like,
sure.
I think that all of us who just have a real responsibility to stand up and call it out when we see it. And there's some really strong, powerful advocates in the space who do that really effectively all the time. But to stand up as individuals ourselves, and when we see it either happening in front of us or we see it in the dark pit of social media or wherever else, but to call it out for what it is, because, frankly, speaking just from my own experience, that could have been me too, because Lord knows I was awfully desperate when I was trying to find recovery and whatnot too. So I think it really just comes down to a question of responsibility for all of us to call it out when we see it.
Mm-hmm. And because one of the things that I find myself getting, as I probably just did, get stuck doing is instead of instead of speaking out for recovery, it's against bad things that are barriers to recovery movements, which is pretty much just turns into like a finger pointing contest instead of how do I solve the problem. Tom, how have you been able to do that effectively, I guess? I mean, instead of not maybe outside of the company, be able to point at the larger problems and create solutions to them instead of maybe playing the blame game.
Yeah, so I would say, Alex, it might sound crazy. We haven't gotten that far yet. And, it's opportunities like this for me to really digest, consume the knowledge, what's going on out there, where do we need to support, where do we have to advocate, who do we have to step up to? And as we progress as a team, as an organization, I would wager that we will be addressing those things head on. It feels like right now with what we're doing together as a team, the board, the family, all of us, just building a foundation right now and just reaching out to those that need support and help in the local community. It doesn't matter who you are. If we can put your arms around you, we will. So I think it's just going to be for us. It's kind of we're in building mode. So the things that you're all discussing right now, some of the bigger problems out there, bigger issues that need to be addressed, will certainly hit our radar screen like they are now, and we'll step up to it when the timing is right.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. So Melissa, how are we specifically, or if we're not, how can we be heard in the specific political climate right now? Doing stuff like this is great, but how are we currently being heard? Do you think we're being heard enough? Oh, she's muted. There we go.
I don't think that we know how to advocate for ourselves, quite frankly. I think that we're afraid to fight our insurance companies. I think we're afraid to ask questions. I think we're afraid to go to, our employer groups and disclose certain information about ourselves. The reality is we're a protected class, right? Americans with Disabilities Act, it applies to us. We have to be careful about how we present this information, or our parents or our spouses who may be the policyholder. But we have to be responsible for knowing what we should know. We should know what our coverage is, right? And we should be able to speak up and ask questions and push back about what they're covering and what they're not covering. I mean, look, overdose deaths have significantly increased, during the pandemic, right? I can honestly say that if this had been going on, although it wasn't, but if it had been going on when I was still getting loaded, this would be my excuse to stay loaded. Mom, I'm too afraid I'm going to catch COVID. I'm not going to treatment today.
Oh, absolutely.
This is a freaking easy out for me, right? Like, I'm going to use any excuse that I can to push that day where I might have to face the music off, right? It's another way to string people along. I'm not really afraid of COVID at all. I've already stared death in the face, right? Every day I wake up, it's like, here we go again. Like some days worse than others. Some days I really wish that I didn't wake up at all, right? But the drug trade has not stopped. right? It's just as easy today, if not easier, right, to get my hands on anything that I might want. Guarantee, if you've never tried before, you can go down to Pratt & Monroe in Baltimore City and you can find anything you want. Matter of fact, the cops aren't even doing anything about people who are giving out testers on the block. Like, we're not concerned about these things. But yet the CDC reports and some of these other reports that are coming out indicate that COVID is causing the increase in overdose deaths, right? And I would, you know, constructively criticize that, or even the indication that the two are closely correlated. Of course, there could be some correlation. We don't know shit about that. Excuse me.
Yeah.
We don't know anything about that, right?
Yeah, it's kind of trying to find there's a difference between maybe correlation and causation, cause and effect, or if it's just two things happening at the same time. I know. Yeah, Mike, do you have something?
Yeah, I just want to throw out there, and a couple folks have alluded to this too in the comments that I'm seeing, and I think just to play on kind of Melissa's point about fighting insurance companies, because I think it's so important. You want to fight an insurance company, folks, tell the story of how the insurance company screwed you. I mean, that's the number one way. Most of us I have an $830 medical bill for something non-related to addiction altogether sitting behind me right now. And I'm pretty sure if I dig in a little bit deeply here, I'm going to find that an insurance company is screwing me a little bit, because that seems to be how we get $830 medical bills when we actually have health insurance. Tell your story, whatever it is, and tell it in a clear, concise, organized way. Practice it, call up your advocate friends and practice it online, and then tell it. You want to take on insurance companies, there is nothing that will ever trump the voices, no pun intended, of people screwed by the bad guy, and the insurance companies are bad guys. So get out there and tell your story, folks. And if you have a friend who has a story and you know about it, empower them. I mean, we talked about responsibility. That's our responsibility to this cause, is to tell our stories and empower others to tell theirs.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And that's why I love having Tom on here. He's telling his story along with Jimmy's. It's really important stuff. And so how much practice did that take, Tom? Did it just come really naturally to you, or did it take a lot of practice? Because I know me personally, I am good at speaking and doing stuff like this, but as soon as I try to tell my own personal story, I feel like I'm speaking Mandarin, like no one understands what I'm saying. I'm going off in 20 different directions. So like, kind of what's your experience been like trying to, articulate that story?
Yeah. So, I've been in, for the last, call it 20 years almost, working for different technology companies in sales. And, in sales, as you know, I mean, that's all you're doing is sharing stories, solving customer challenges, identifying the pain, and going through that situation. And of course, once you solve it, obviously you're out there advocating and sharing what you did, right? So had some of that as I guess, as practice, as runway to prepare myself for this moment that I never thought I would be in with my younger brother, who I would say didn't really have that voice, didn't really have that opportunity to share his story. I mean, in the way that, I would say his final couple of months were going down, there were some stories locked up inside that none of us could really pull out of him. And some of them, frankly, we couldn't see. And now looking back, we do see him now. It just, he wasn't telling it, So, out there every day, sharing the story, talking about not just my brother and the impact there, but again, other families that are currently going through it, or that potentially will be going through it at some point down the road. So I think that the story sharing, the consistency and the messaging wasn't too difficult to overcome. It was just one of those things where you never think you're going to be in these shoes until one day you're walking in them, and here we are. So it's not easy. I mean, people will tell you, I know we're live right now. I mean, for me, it's very emotional. For my family, that's part of our team. I'm not sure they could be on this live episode, right now without, of course, breaking down and shedding some tears. I mean, like I said, it's been just over a year for us. And we just got through all the first birthday, the first holiday of this and that. And, but no, I mean, it's one of those things where my belief is that just if you keep it front and center, keep it top of mind, make sure people really understand where you're coming from. I mean, you guys saw my profile picture. Of course, it was hair slicked back, tie on, jacket on. Probably thinking, who is this guy coming on? I joined. I got my T-shirt on, baseball cap. like ready to go. And this is me. But, you know, during the day, working as a leader for a technology company, you know, working with different teams and businesses, you know, of course, that's a different vehicle, a different message. But the reality of it is, I would say, if I looked around and scanned the room, whether it's a virtual room or even in person, what I'm going through right now, you know, obviously is the very tough moment of losing your best friend, losing your brother, but they got somebody that knows somebody that's going through what he was going through, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just creating groundswell. We got to create groundswell. I want people to look at me like, hey, you know, there's Tom that obviously is crisp and clean during the week. He's doing his thing, making an impact in the business world, but he's making a bigger impact in this world. That's the mission that I'm on right now.
No, that's cool. I really appreciate your passion, man. And so, Melissa, Tom was touching on something, just to pivot a little bit, that I think is quite interesting. So, in reference to how he was presenting himself and now how he's presenting himself, is that, you know, how we can deal with stigma? Is just kind of like, you know, shape ourselves to look more professional and people will take us more seriously? Is it that easy? I mean, how do we kind of shake that stigma? Because I personally also t-shirt, this is like my band t-shirt from years ago, and because I like the casuality and the comfortability of it while still doing something important like this. And so how do we continuously shake that stigma while also still trying to keep our identity?
I mean, my identity is exactly as I show up every day. I mean, authenticity is meaningful, right? I mean, nobody wants the representative to show up. And if I don't tell the truth about my life and how I got to this place, you know, nearing 11 years removed from, you know, a place where, you know, the dark underworld should have taken me, right? But by the grace of God, of my understanding, right? And I think it's really, really important that we show up exactly as we are in and show that we're real. My life is not perfect today, but I rely on something bigger than myself to you know, survive me on a daily basis. And life is hard sometimes, right? But I got to get up, I got to show up and talk about it. I mean, people would look at me today, you know, I'm walking my dog, I'm a single mother, I own my own house, all these things can be taken away in a moment, right? But nobody might think of where they could have found me 11 and a half years ago. No one, right? Who doesn't know my background would think of me in the place, you know, on the side of the road, 18-wheelers dropping me off. Any number of stories we could go back over the course of time, but that is not what defines me. What defines me is the steps that I've taken to move away from that, right? And the experience that I'm allowed to share because it's mine, in the right setting at the right moment, to allow somebody else to have a little bit of hope that maybe if it could happen for me, it could happen for you too. And you don't have to love yourself. You don't even have to think it's possible. But I'm going to hold your hand until we get through the door, and it's possible for you too. We have to be real. We have to be real.
No, absolutely. And that's been one of the backbones of this place that I love more than anything else, honestly, is the authenticity and ability for me to be myself without having to sugarcoat anything while still doing important work. So, Michael, you've talked a lot about sharing your story and a story in general, and I think that is completely valid. But from just to play devil's advocate, a lot of stories can get caught in the negative. This is how I was in active addiction, or this is how do we reframe that in a positive light aside from just but now look at me, because plenty of people deal with that negative and say, if I'm not in recovery, how do I not just point at that and go, well, that's because he or she or you made bad decisions or something like that? How can you educate through these stories while not being, I don't know, opinionated, just as a devil's advocate?
Well, I think you have to, first of all, I think you have to tell your story in an effective way, right? Because sometimes when sometimes when we get into recovery, and I apologize, I am going to get up on a soapbox for a minute here for everybody. But sometimes I'm up here now, I'm elevated, I'm ready to go. Sometimes we get into recovery and we love to shout our story from the rooftop. And it's because, hell, many of us have been to hell and back. And like when we look around and we see, I'm also a parent with 2 kids and have a wonderful home. And, you want to shout from the rooftop, given where we've all come from. Well, when we do that, that's actually just about me. When I do that, that's just about me. It's not actually about you. And if we want to combat stigma, it's actually about everybody else. It's not about us, right? So if we're going to tell our story, we have to do it effectively. And what we train folks on, I know what they focused on at Mobilize Recovery, is kind of the work of a guy named Marshall Gans, who talks about telling a story of self. And that means talking about a challenge we faced, a choice we made, and an outcome we experienced. And if anybody here could talk about it, I've never met Tom before in my life. And this is exactly how Tom, whether he knows it or not, introduced himself at the start here. I was sitting here thinking, Tom, this dude is on fire. This guy is an uncaged leader roaring like the lion he is out on the world, right? And it's because he just talked about what happened, the choice he made in response to it, and the results he's producing. So if we want to fight stigma, let's talk about the challenge we faced in active addiction, the choice we made to get into recovery, and then the life we're leading now. And just do it in 3 minutes or less, just like that. That's all we need to do. And it doesn't have to be our whole addiction story. We don't have to walk through every single gory detail that we've done. When I introduce myself to crowds, I talk very specifically about the moment about when I walked into treatment and I picked up a copy of the Seattle Times, and there was the headline that read Senate Democratic Executive under investigation. And that was a big problem because I was the Senate Democratic executive who was under investigation, right? And then that's just telling it in such a strong, structured way actually makes it about your audience and not about you. And that's an effective story. And that's how we fight stigma. When we just shout from the rooftops about how great we are, that's just about us. And it's totally fun, but it's not effective. So just remember that when you're out there telling your story, that it has to be effective. And an old political mentor said to me one time that brevity is power. And sometimes I'd like to tattoo that on all of us. 3 minutes or less, folks. Brevity is power.
And I think Shakespeare said brevity is the soul of wit too. So I'm a big fan of brevity. Tom,
very impressive.
Tom, why don't you go ahead and take this opportunity to share that story of you and Jimmy? Because I'd love to hear kind of the beginning and the end all in succession. We've been talking about it kind of in piecemeal throughout this time, and I'd really love to give you the opportunity to do that now.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alex. Yes, so Jimmy, he's my younger brother. He would be 37 on September 25th, or about 3 weeks away from now on a Friday. And, bigger guy. I'm not, you obviously can't see how tall I am. I'm not that tall. I'm under 6 foot. But Jimmy was over 6 foot tall, just a big teddy bear, had a heart of gold. The one thing that I always said about Jimmy is when I saw his viewing services, and my family owns funeral homes in Maryland. My grandfather started one over 50 years ago. My parents own and live in one still today. In fact, Jimmy's services was in their house or in their business. Yeah. Is that Jimmy's services, he had the most diverse group of friends ever. He could plug into any, clique or group, you want and be like, hugging them all and loving them all. And everybody came out, for his service and just, it was tough and rough, but it was just amazing to see the impact he made. In fact, at his service, the pastor called him the grill master, just the way in which he always tend to kind of host the party and, make mistakes and, have some fun. But, we knew that, Jimmy, he made such a big impact and we wanted to keep that spirit alive that we said, we have to do something, not sure what it is, but we have to do something. And that day, which wasn't too long after he passed, we made a commitment. And like I said, in a matter of weeks, spun up the nonprofit organization. It's the Hoffa Foundation. The coffee itself, it happens to be right here. Right, if you can see it, there's Jimmy's blend, Hoffa Beans. It's amazing. As I mentioned, he was a diehard Baltimore Ravens fan. Looks like we're gonna have something pop up on the screen. There you go. There it is. Perfect.
Cool.
That's actually, when you visit our website, hoffabeans.org, it brings you right there to that page where you can see the great tasting coffee there in the middle, along with the black and purple shirts, both men's and women's, which are great. I happen to be wearing one now. Obviously, it's not the purple on the website, a little bit different. But again, all the proceeds go towards the foundation. And again, very beginning stages, but already doing great things out there and making that impact. We actually heard today, thankfully, in Maryland, Governor Hogan came on and announced phase 3 is underway this Friday. And we have a big outdoor tailgate event, on September 20th in Maryland, prior to a Baltimore Ravens game. So anyway, just a lot of great things out there. Yeah.
No, that's really cool. So how just as a follow-up, how have so the money that goes into the foundation, how's that been utilized?
Yes. So right now we've taken a part of the money back when the pandemic first, as I mentioned earlier, and started redirecting some of it. Right. We obviously have money that's going to be utilized towards the standing up the first sober living facility. But we also took some of the money and put it into other organizations like Rising Above Addiction, the Carroll Hospital Center. We sent them some money for PPE at the time when it was very much needed. We addressed some of the Meals on Wheels locally in the Baltimore area as well. So just been kind of, divvying some of it out, but making sure the core of the proceeds is going to go towards that first sober living facility. However, I will tell you this, is that my mother is always on the move, and she's interacting with other mothers that lost their sons and daughters, working in different groups. It's keeping her active and busy. And as she uncovers other need out there, we found out some people need something, we'll help them out. So, we're always looking to, like I said, touch anybody that we can. But ultimately, one day, looking forward to getting back on one of these episodes, perhaps in the next 12, 18 months, and with, a big celebratory welcoming, saying, hey, here's a picture of our first sober living facility. And it's not just, here's the roof over your head and a place to stay. I've got commitment from friends and others that we're going to be heavily involved, accountability, teaching people different things, making sure that there's the success rate is high. We actually met with some folks that have an organization down in Howard County, Maryland, not too long ago. They were sharing some stats on their facilities and the success rate. And that's what I kept thinking about, is that, when people, we work with people down the road, making sure that it's a lasting, not only just a lasting impact. That person, can come to us, we give them what they need, and we're with them for the journey, for as long as we can stay with them. So
that's awesome,
I'd like to chime in there on the tail end.
Please.
So can we talk about the stat thing? I think in general, right? I have not come across any standard practice for what is a successful outcome, right? From it in the recovery process, how are we defining success? And I'm asking this question to whoever's watching.
Okay.
How are we defining success in recovery? Does anybody have any idea? Because I have been around for a little while. I know what my own personal opinion is as far as that's concerned, but insurance companies are now focused on outcome, based contract and all sorts of metrics. And how are we defining success?
I don't know, but you did say Millman was an actuary, correct? I feel like an actuary would be the best person to come up with a stat for success, aggregating something along the lines of jail time served, quality of life, and I don't know, clean time or something like that. But the problem with that is success is intrinsic. What I consider success is how happy I am in life. What Joe Schmo could consider success is what his bank account looks like. So I think regardless of recovery, it's almost unquantifiable, in my opinion.
John Chinholzer says, breath in, breath out, success, right? A day alive is success. I agree with that, right? I don't know, but I think that going back to the insurance stuff and how are we paying for what, and how are we defining an outcome, right? It's in my life, I have but a daily reprieve. And while I may have been, I have recovered from the problem of drink, I've recovered from the problem of drugs, I have daily struggles with any number of other manifestations of, you know, just trying to live and be of maximum service to the people around me. Does success mean that I never have another drink or a drug? Does it mean that if I pick up a drink and put it down and make a call to my sponsor or you know, seek help or a therapist, is it a shortened length of you know, relapse? Is that, I don't know what that means, but I think that part of our conversations when we're talking about how are we contracting with insurance companies in the treatment industry, right? Medical facilities, and how are they being awarded contracts for services rendered to patients around successful outcomes. If the insurance companies are defining outcomes, it means that you're not going to a hospital ever again, right? That like somebody calls to check up on you, that you show up to your primary care appointment, you get your methadone dose, you get your Suboxone, whatever that is, you check all the boxes. But does that mean you're really living? I don't know.
Yeah, I know plenty of people who consider being clean to be successful, and then I know plenty of people who also happen to have a lot more clean time than me that seem completely miserable. So I think success is just such a relative term, and I think what I hear is that if we don't define it, someone else will.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's, you know, it's interesting because, and just thinking through this now as you're talking about, you're right, because here I am, you know, having lunch, just learning about different things, and the number, the metric was based on the amount of people coming through the organization that have remained clean coming out the other side. They keep track of, and the number was 70%. And I thought to myself right away, you know, in my normal day stuff that I do, you know, 70% is not a good number. Like if you're 70%, you're like, you know, you're in trouble, right? Like you've got to be in the, you know, low mid-90s.
If that was a grade, that's a C. But in recovery, that's like completely unheard of.
Right.
Again, though, I think the point that you made, Alex, is the right one, which is that if we want to change how insurance companies are seeing this stuff, it's up to us to make that change, right? Because they're going to do whatever is most convenient for them. And whatever's most convenient for insurance companies is the same as what's most convenient for us 0% of the time, right? So it's up to us to dictate what that change what that change is going to be. So we've got to stand up and say something. We can't sit around and be quiet about it.
Mm-hmm. And I have in newfound recovery become a little more goal oriented, and I heard that kind of in how Tom was sharing that he'd love to come back here a year later and say, you know, this is our first RCO, or here's our first sober living facility, is I think exactly what you said. And I think that's a good goal to have. So as those in recovery, I've also learned that good goals should be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. So what are sort of these? Yeah, exactly. So what are these actual attainable, realistic goals that we could achieve? Because no one dying from an overdose ever again it's you know, it's not, I don't think it's attainable currently right now. So what are some that could actually be attainable and smart as a whole? Michael, do you have any ideas there?
Well, I think about it a little bit community by community, and that's just my take.
Exactly.
I think these changes are going to happen community by community. I think that the massive national moment comes about because of what happens in towns and counties and states around the country. And I say that because if you look at 1 million like successful initiatives, it all started in one little town, you know, and we learn what works and what doesn't. So I'm reluctant to point to one single thing that has to happen. What I will gladly point to is all of the amazing leadership that happens community by community, state by state, because that's where this change is really going to happen. And this is my friend Carol McDade would probably smack me over the side of the head to hear me say this, but like, you know, I just think that the political scene, and I say this to someone who spent a decade plus in the political arena, is such a mess that on the federal level, and there's still some sense of sanity locally. So let's focus on the sanity, and you know, it starts with your neighbor first and foremost, and it starts with everything else we've been talked about. But let's see what's going on community by community and make those changes happen, because that's attainable.
Do you agree with that? What are you thinking there, Melissa?
I love everything that Michael's talking about. I mean, I think, you know, during this pandemic time and being at home in quarantine, right? I've had countless experiences with just my neighbors. And I don't know, there's probably 60 houses right in this little neighborhood where, you know, I've experienced neighbors who have gone through some, you know, rough periods, right? I'm having a tough time getting out of bed. Maybe that's me some days, right? But being vulnerable to the people that are closest to us, even if they might not be our best of friends, right? And again, I personally believe that I have a responsibility to, you know, to the people around me to share my experiences and how I've been able to, you know, use some tools in my tool belt to get out of bed, right? Baby steps some days. Some days I can run and you can't keep up with me, but other days I need you to pull me along. But we can look to our neighbors for those sorts of things where it's appropriate, right? And oftentimes there's a lot of people that'll just come up to me because they've heard through the grapevine that I'm open to having certain conversations that they might not be willing to have with other people. And I'm down for that, right? If you don't want to talk to anybody else, but you trust me enough to share a little bit about you, nobody will ever know about our conversation. We'll do exactly what's necessary, you know, to get help if we need to, right? To find alternative resources or even just to sit with you and be quiet until you can move, right? Mm-hmm. But there have been countless opportunities over the last several months where I've, you know, had the honor and the privilege to be invited into my neighbor's homes just to sit, right? Just to sit still and because maybe they didn't know who else to call. But that's only because I have been willing to share my story, to Michael's point, in the right, you know, the dose, in the right room, the right people, as it's appropriate. And oftentimes I find that I get that feeling in my gut when it's time to share a little bit, right? And the more I get in touch with that feeling in my gut, the more I can intuitively follow through with what I've learned works in my world.
No, absolutely. I heard yesterday, I have to ask Michael this real quick, because I know how much you detest federal politics, or maybe not. I don't want to speak for you too much. So I read yesterday and I'm reading now, there is what I consider very important bill that will be voted on next month, which is federal reclassification. That's the word I prefer for cannabis. Is that one going to affect the recovery community in any way, and two, how? If hypothetically it passes, I think just the fact that it is even being discussed on a federal level in conversation, in my opinion, is progress. What do you think?
Wow, you're asking me to say an opinion of myself. I was going to take my 10 years of politics and give you a politician's answer, which was going to be
Michael's.
Well, so I'll give you the politician's answer first, which is yes, and I don't know. Okay. I think this is, again, my opinion, but I think it depends on how you define the recovery community. You know, I think that when it comes to legal cannabis, you know, I think that you're going to get very different opinions. I don't think there's a set uniform opinion that everybody shares on this particular issue. I was just having this conversation with someone who I agree with on everything within this community. And so I don't, yes, it will have an impact. What that impact looks like, I don't know. What I would say is more important than the impact that will have is that we remain aligned behind the fundamental idea that the reason why everyone comes to the table on this issue, whether you're in recovery, you're a family member, public health, whatever brings you there, it's all the money. Right? So it's that we all want to see fewer people losing their lives. It's the one thing we all agree on is that too many people die. And if we can focus on alignment around that and not worry as much about some people are going to be all for this, some people are going to be against it. You know what? Let's just find the common ground that we all align behind that one principal idea. And then I'm going to focus on the things that I believe work, and you focus on the things that we believe work, and we can just stay aligned behind the idea that we both want to save lives. To me, leaning into a divisive issue like that, especially now, given the climate, I just think it's the wrong strategy, personally. I think focusing on everything else is better. So that's my long-winded answer, but I like my politician's answer better.
Yeah, 2 words or less.
Yes, and I don't know.
And I don't know. Yeah. Anyone else have any strong opinions on that? I think it's interesting at the very least, because I have been at meetings and stuff like that where people have spoken very highly of the, using it as medically assisted treatment. And I don't have any super strong opinion on it. I think that it is a springboard for people to make a lot of money off of, and then block out the people who, it's a huge opportunity for people to capitalize on it that don't need to, which sucks. But it could be very good for the recovery community at the exact same time. So that's kind of my opinion on it. Anyone else got anything else? I mean, I've had a blast.
My experience is anytime I ever came anywhere near any of that, I was paranoid and out of my mind. So I haven't felt the need to utilize any of and a reliance on a power greater than myself to take me to someplace I never thought that A, I deserved, B, was waiting for me, and C, that I could be a part of for this long, right? Mm-hmm. I don't have any opinions on how you get here. I just hope you get here, right? Get here however you get here. And there's a way to get here, right, without doing anything you don't want to. And you can take a little stops on the way and get a better education as to what might not work for you. But I don't have an opinion on how you get here. I just want you here.
Awesome. Tom, any final thoughts from you, my friend, before we wrap up?
Yeah, I was thinking about, the topic right before this one around the goal setting and
please.
The SMART methodology, Alex. What this pandemic has taught me that trying to set long-term goals is very difficult. I mean, you set goals this time last year and think about when, January, February came around, all those goals were disrupted. So the way I see it today, the way we see it is that a goal should really be, in my mind, a daily goal, that one simple thing to achieve, and then just allow the compound effect to take care of the rest. So the daily becomes the weekly, becomes the monthly, becomes the quarterly. But I think every day, if you're doing something that aligns to your mission, one simple thing, and you achieve that goal, right? You can hit that every single day. So I think that thinking about the 30 and the 60-day out type goals, even the 6 months out, it's very difficult to do these days, no doubt. But I think the daily goal is something we all should keep at the forefront, that one thing to achieve every single day that aligns to your mission.
That's good advice, buddy. Melissa, any final thoughts?
No, I love my friend Christy is watching here, and she says there's more than one way up the mountain, and I couldn't agree more. She too is a person in long-term recovery and has a story that you wouldn't believe looking at her. Actually, she probably taught me everything that I know about insurance. So kudos to Christy, and thanks for joining us. I don't, right? I just know that the disease of addiction does not discriminate, and it ain't going anywhere. But it does not have to be as pervasive, and we don't have to struggle through it, right? The more doors that we can open, the more pathways that we can, highlight. Access should not be hidden, and it shouldn't be difficult, right? It's free, right? Recovery is free, right? If we need medical care, there's some insurance that's available, but we also have free programs that are available too. I don't care how you get here. I just hope you get here.
Beautiful. Michael, any other final thoughts from me, my friend?
Yeah. First off, Tom, I'm going to buy some of your coffee because it sounds amazing. Melissa, thanks for all this incredibly smart stuff you're saying. And I just want to say that, folks, it's all up to us. So we can't blame anybody. Like, we're responsible for the change we want to see, and we have to lead that way, and we have to lead with responsibility. So invest in yourself, invest in your leadership. That's what we're here to try to offer to everybody. So I hope folks are willing to do that. Invest in yourself, invest in your leadership, and you're going to love the results you produce. And you can get all the things that we've been talking about here for the last hour.
Absolutely. Great advice all around. Invest in hoffabeans.org. How about that? It's been a pleasure having you all on. Excellent conversation. Shout out to our producer, Todd. He always does a great job. Melissa, Tom, Michael, it's been a blast. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, my friends.
Until next time.
See you all.
Thanks, Alex.
How do you start a recovery community organization? How do you start a recovery community center? The recovery industry, as we know it, is an emerging industry, thanks in part to organizations like McShin, but recovery people everywhere. They're getting involved, and they want to know how they can maximize the outcome of their efforts. It's not for the meek at heart or the weak of mind. You got to have some real inward strength, fortitude, courage, because it gets to be a day and night, 7 day a week, 365 day a year industry. There's nothing so simple about it. How to create awesome, authentic recovery, community-oriented systems of care with whatever it is you're working with. We have, I think, one of the finest authentic recovery community organizations in North America. We have a 15,000 square foot recovery center, over 100 recovery beds. We're currently full-time in 3 jails. We've showed other local recovery communities how to percolate, emerge, and become good, awesome organizations. So a lot to learn here, a lot of reason to be part of this. More later. Thank you very much.
Tired of waiting, lost while I'm sitting at home. Dream of a new destination, lust for something unknown. Oh, you better leave it alone. I'd rather get up and go. How long can I lie around waiting for it? Sometimes you gotta walk out the door. No limits, no ceiling, no crown. No pressure gonna hold me down. No stopping till I break every rule. No limits to what I can do. No, well, it's too far away. No border gonna stand in my way. No wall that I can't break through. No limits to what I can do.